Lucas stepped off the old yellow bus at the front of Riverwood Middle School, his shoes clicking on the sidewalk as two friends whispered and pointed curiously at the new transfer student in silence. The morning sun glowed gently over the playground while a soft breeze rustled leaves and tall oak trees lining the path, and Lucas felt a flutter of both excitement and nervousness in his chest at the unknown day ahead as memories of his old school stayed close. As he neared the main doors, a group of older students gathered by the lockers glared in silent challenge, their eyes sharp and critical, while Lucas clutched his books a little tighter against his chest to stay calm as he thought of his family's support. He could hear low whispers rising like a soft wave as classmates shared rumors about the mysterious new boy, and he wondered which stories were true and which were wild guesses born from curious minds. At the lockers, someone shoved Lucas's backpack roughly, and he stumbled forward before straightening his back and meeting his classmates' cold stares with silent strength and calm eyes that hid more than they revealed, and he worried about fitting in. One bully sneered and called him names in a mocking voice that echoed off the gray tile walls, while another shoved papers from Lucas's arm before they fluttered across the floor like startled birds. Lucas bent to gather the scattered pages and saw familiar words and numbers floating above the sheets, and he felt his fingers tingle as a barely noticeable shimmer of light danced for a moment, and he wondered what power stirred. He glanced around quickly, but no one else seemed to notice the faint glow or the whisper-like pulse in his fingertips, and he tucked the papers into his backpack with a small, worried breath as he prayed no one would notice. He walked on toward the classroom, his heart settling into a steady beat, and he tried to push thoughts of strange power out of his mind so he could focus on finding his seat, hoping he could make new friends. The classroom door opened with a soft click, and Lucas stepped inside as 30 eyes turned from textbooks and desks to watch the new student find a place among them. He scanned the rows of desks until he found the empty chair in the middle, then placed his backpack down and sat slowly, so as not to draw more attention than necessary as he tried not to look lost. The teacher greeted him with a warm smile and a gentle question about his name and hometown, which made Lucas's stomach flutter like a tiny butterfly inside his chest as he pictured his old teacher smiling. He replied in a steady voice that carried clearly through the room, and the teacher nodded kindly as she returned to writing names on the attendance list, and he felt a small spark of pride. A gasp rippled through the back of the room when someone realized Lucas's pencil hovered above the desk by itself before it gently tapped the wood twice and fell back into place. The bullies turned pale in surprise, and Lucas watched carefully as they exchanged uneasy glances that told of shock and fear hidden beneath their mocking faces, and he felt calm in the storm. Lucas felt a soft warmth spread through his chest as he regained his calm, and he took a deep breath before opening his notebook to begin the first-class assignment, and he thought he could handle it. Each time he breathed slowly and focused, Lucas noticed how the chalk dust on his fingertips danced in a tiny swirl before falling back down gently as the swirl stayed bright a moment. The classroom clock ticked steadily as the teacher explained the lesson, and Lucas sat upright, his eyes bright and alert despite the strange magic stirring within him, while his heartbeat felt soft and sure. Outside the window, clouds drifted lazily across a blue sky, and a gentle light filled the room that made the magic feel soft rather than frightening, so he felt less scared inside. Lucas raised his hand politely when the teacher asked who had a question, and his voice sounded clear and calm as he spoke about the first problem, and he nodded when the teacher smiled. The teacher nodded with approval and wrote Lucas's answer on the board, while the bullies shuffled in their seats, unable to hide new respect in their surprised expressions. A soft giggle slipped from a classmate near the window, and Lucas turned to see a girl smile as she held out a fresh sheet of paper when she noticed his supplies were scattered before he could politely reply with thanks. He accepted the paper with gratitude and said thank you softly, feeling relief that someone saw more than just the strange new student, and he wondered if she understood him. The teacher paused the lesson for a moment and smiled at Lucas before continuing, giving him a small gesture of kindness that he had not expected, and the room felt warm around him. Lucas worked on the problems with careful focus as the class moved forward, and the warmth inside him hummed like a quiet song that he tried to ignore, yet he could not stop feeling it. Every time Lucas lifted his pen, he felt a spark in his palm that faded quickly before anyone else could notice it, though he tried to hide his surprise. The class moved on to the next question, and Lucas answered in a calm tone while a quiet glow flickered around his pen tip for an instant. Several classmates glanced over with interest and whispered softly to each other, clearly curious about the new student's odd behavior as many faces looked on in wonder. Lucas felt his face grow warm but did not look away, and he answered one more question before the teacher moved on, leaving quiet whispers in the air. When the bell rang for recess, Lucas gathered his things slowly, wondering if he should feel proud or frightened by what just happened, and he felt his heart beat steady. He tucked his notebook into his backpack and stepped out of the classroom door, which closed behind him with a gentle click as he stepped into bright sunlight. The hallway felt louder now, full of chatter and laughter, but Lucas paused and closed his eyes to steady his thoughts as echoes of laughter filled the hall. He sensed the soft glow in his palms again, and it made him realize how different he truly was from the others. A group of friends called for Lucas down the hall, offering him an invite to join a game, and he smiled as he rushed forward laughing and shouting in friendly voices. He felt torn between the kindness of new classmates and the fear of his secret, wondering if he could ever share his gift with someone, yet he still felt the secret tremble. Lucas joined the group at the gym doorway and felt relief as their laughter warmed the cool morning air around him, and the air felt warm with hope. He held his hands close to his sides, afraid that if he reached out they might glow again and reveal him, so he squeezed his fists tight. A breeze blew across the court and lifted a leaf into the air, and Lucas watched it twist and turn before it floated gently down, and he felt peace in the motion. He smiled at the leaf as it landed softly and reminded him that nature's quiet magic could be part of his story too, and he found courage in that moment. With one last deep breath, Lucas turned toward the group and stepped forward with hope in his heart, ready to face whatever the day would bring with a smile ready on his face. As the bell rang, Lucas stepped into the gymnasium courtyard where dozens of students played and shouted under a blue sky, and his heart trembled with both excitement and hope as he scanned the scene for friendly faces. He noticed a group near the basketball hoop dribbling an orange ball with rhythmic thumps, while another cluster kicked a patch soccer ball back and forth across the concrete with laughter that echoed off the walls. Two older boys leaned against the chain-link fence and exchanged mocking glances as they watched Lucas approach with steady steps, their sneers making his skin itch with worry even as he tried to appear calm. A girl with curly hair waved at Lucas from near the playground gates and offered a warm smile that made him feel a flicker of comfort, reminding him that not everyone here wanted to see him fail. One of the older boys shoved a younger student who stood too close while making a low taunt about new kids, and the victim stumbled backward into Lucas's path as though fate had guided him deliberately. Lucas caught the student's arm gently to steady him and kept his voice soft as he asked if he was all right, his kind tone surprising both the victim and the bullies who paused in mid-taunt. The boy Lucas helped nodded and muttered thanks before hurrying away toward the water fountain, leaving Lucas facing the two older boys whose smirks had been replaced by curious frowns. Lucas swallowed hard and looked directly into the eyes of the taller boy, feeling a strange warmth coil in his chest, as though his hidden powers were aware that he needed courage most of all. At that moment, a stray soccer ball skidded across the courtyard and flew toward another group of students, and Lucas saw it heading straight for the trio of bullies standing by the fence. With a quick movement of his hand, the ball slowed in the air as if caught by an unseen net, then dropped gently to the ground at his feet, causing a hush to fall over everyone who had witnessed the odd event. The two older boys stared in disbelief at the ball, their jaws slack, while Lucas lifted an eyebrow and tapped the ball with his foot as though it were no different from any ordinary object. The curly-haired girl stepped forward from where she had been watching and gasped in amazement as she moved to where Lucas stood, her eyes shining with a mixture of fear and wonder. One of the bullies regained his composure and laughed nervously as though it must be a trick of the light, but Lucas's calm face and steady gaze refused to let the laughter continue for long. The taller bully sneered and demanded that Lucas put on a show by kicking the ball high into the air, using a derisive tone that invited a huge crowd to form around them. Lucas hesitated for just a moment before nodding politely. Then he tapped the ball with his toe and sent it soaring upward in a perfect arc that shimmered slightly before it touched nothing but air. The ball hovered at its peak as though held by an invisible hand, and students around the courtyard pointed and whispered to each other, their excitement mingled with fear at what Lucas had just demonstrated. After a few seconds, the ball floated downward into Lucas's outstretched hand as gently as a falling leaf, and he caught it without shifting his posture or showing any strain. A sudden cheer rose from a group of younger students who had been watching nearby, and a teacher's whistle sounded sharply as she emerged from the building to check on the noise. The teacher's eyes widened when she saw the ball suspended in Lucas's hand and the stunned faces of the bullies, and she hurried forward calling for order before anyone could decide whether to cheer or flee. Lucas lowered the ball and smiled politely at the teacher, then placed it on the ground as he followed her gaze to the group of bullies who now looked smaller and uncertain. The teacher asked calmly if Lucas needed help, and he shook his head gently, explaining that he was fine and that he had simply reached for the ball as part of a game. She nodded slowly and turned to the other students, reminding them that recess was for kindness and fair play, Then she walked back toward the entrance while keeping an eye on the bullies. As the teacher walked away, the curly-haired girl returned to Lucas's side and introduced herself, offering a grin and pointing out that she had never seen magic like that before. Lucas smiled shyly and whispered his thanks before glancing back toward the group of bullies whose mocking expressions had softened into puzzled confusion. One bully muttered something under his breath as he kicked at the ground, then turned on his heel and stalked back toward a shaded bench with his friend, leaving Lucas and his new companion alone. Lucas exhaled slowly as the strange warmth in his chest receded, and he realized that his secret had escaped his control in a way he had not meant to share. The girl led Lucas toward a circle of benches where a few students sat eating snacks and chatting, and she offered him a seat between two smiling faces who waved him over enthusiastically. Lucas hesitated briefly, but then accepted her invitation and settled onto the wooden bench, his backpack rustling as he set it beside him, and felt more at ease than he had in hours. One student offered him a granola bar and another shared a bottle of water, and Lucas thanked them all quietly, feeling his cheeks warm with gratitude as he unwrapped the sweet snack. All around them, students played and laughed under the midday sun, but Lucas kept his gaze focused on his new group of friends who asked him about his old school and his favorite games. He answered each question with simple honesty and discovered that his own smile felt more natural than the one he had worn earlier to hide his fear. At one point, a gentle breeze stirred the leaves overhead and carried the distant sound of the teacher's whistle, calling everyone back inside, reminding Lucas that recess had almost ended. Before he left the bench, the curly-haired girl squeezed his hand briefly and told him she believed in him, adding that Riverwood was better now that he was here. Lucas's chest swelled with a quiet joy at her words, and he realized how powerful even a small gesture of kindness could feel compared to the weight of fear he had carried. The teacher's voice echoed through the courtyard once more, so Lucas and his new friend stood and gathered their belongings as the bullies watched from the bench without meeting anyone's eyes. Lucas felt the familiar warmth stir again, but focused on his breathing until it faded, reminding himself that he must learn to control his gift before it surprised him again. He straightened his posture and stepped onto the concrete path leading back to the classroom, his steps measured and certain as if each footfall marked a step toward mastering his power. The curly-haired girl matched his pace and chatted about tomorrow's science project with enthusiasm that lifted Lucas's spirits and distracted him from doubts and fears. As they approached the door to return indoors, Lucas realized that he had survived his first recess and made friends who saw him for more than a strange new kid with hidden talents. With each step back into the classroom, Lucas carried a new confidence that felt lighter than his secret power and stronger than any mocking word he had heard that morning. When Lucas returned to the classroom after recess, the sun beamed through tall windows and painted bright shapes on the floor while he slipped into his seat quietly, feeling both calm and curious. The math teacher smiled at the students and wrote a challenging problem on the board before asking them to work in silence for 10 minutes, feeling hopeful of their focus. Lucas took out his notebook and pencil carefully, his heart fluttering as he thought about the glow he had felt earlier in the courtyard, feeling a hint of both fear and excitement. As he began writing the first number, the pencil shimmered slightly before the glow faded and left only clear lines on the paper, feeling strange yet familiar. A classmate seated nearby glanced over and whispered about the little light that had danced over Lucas's pencil tip, and Lucas felt his cheeks warm with surprise, feeling embarrassed yet proud. He kept his face calm as he continued solving the problem one step at a time, his mind focused on addition and subtraction rather than his secret power, feeling determined to do his best. The bullies in the back row formed a small circle and whispered to each other with narrowed eyes, their judgment making Lucas feel uneasy, feeling the pressure of his secret. One of the bullies tapped on the desk loudly and sneered, but Lucas ignored him and pressed on with the next calculation without looking up, feeling resolve strengthen inside him. When Lucas erased a mistake, the pencil scooted across the paper on its own for a moment before he reached out and steadied it with a gentle touch, feeling amazed and nervous. A hush fell over the room as he fixed the error faster than most kids, and the teacher paused her explanation to glance at his neat work, feeling a subtle thrill of triumph. Lucas felt his heartbeat slow as he finished the problem with care, and he raised his hand to show the teacher he was ready for feedback, feeling both nervous and proud. The teacher nodded and walked to his desk, her eyes widening at the flawless solution before she asked him to explain his process, feeling impressed by his calm explanation. Lucas stood and spoke clearly about each step, pointing to the numbers on his page as he described how he added and subtracted in a calm voice, feeling confident despite his worries. His classmates listened and leaned forward with interest, their earlier whispers replaced by silent awe at his confident explanation, feeling the weight of their attention. A soft thump sounded when a book fell off a nearby desk, but Lucas stayed focused on the teacher's nod as she praised his clear thinking, feeling content and grounded. At that moment, the taller bully rolled his eyes and mumbled under his breath about lucky guesses, but his words sounded weak and hollow to Lucas's ears, feeling smug satisfaction. The teacher smiled kindly at Lucas and returned to the board to show how his steps matched the correct method, making everyone copy his process, feeling grateful for her guidance. Lucas sat down quietly and watched as the bullies clenched their fists in frustration, their faces showing more curiosity than cruelty now, feeling a small sense of victory. He felt a small thrill at his ability to impress the class without using his powers, and he realized he could shine through hard work, feeling hopeful about the future. When the lesson ended, the teacher assigned partners for the next task, pairing Lucas with a girl who had offered him the paper at lunch, feeling relieved to work with a friend. Lucas smiled at his partner and thanked her softly, feeling relieved that she would be at his side during the next activity, feeling grateful for her kindness. They worked together to solve a set of 2 equations, sharing ideas and checking each other's steps with quiet cooperation, feeling teamwork and trust. Lucas explained his reasoning in simple words, and his partner nodded in approval before writing the answer on her own paper, feeling encouraged by her support. Nearby, the bullies watched the teamwork unfold, and one of them glanced at the door and whispered something before leaving the room with his friend, feeling confused but curious. Lucas did not notice their departure at first, but he sensed a shift in the air as the classroom grew quieter and more peaceful, feeling relief from the tension. He leaned back in his chair and stretched his arms, his shoulders loosening from the tension he had held since morning, feeling his body relax. The pencil on his desk caught his eye as it glowed faintly for an instant, and Lucas reminded himself to keep his power hidden until the right moment, feeling cautious and determined. The next assignment was to write a short paragraph about the math steps they had learned, and Lucas focused on using clear sentences and neat handwriting, feeling excited to write. He wrote about adding and subtracting numbers carefully, describing each move as if telling a story, enjoying how words could explain a process, feeling creative and happy. As he finished, the teacher collected the papers and praised the class for thoughtful responses, promising to share top examples at the start of the next lesson, feeling proud to be included. Lucas felt proud that his paragraph was chosen first among the top samples, and he saw the teacher hold up his page for everyone to see, feeling like a hero in a small way. His classmates clapped softly, and even the bullies outside gave a short clap before moving on down the hall, feeling acceptance seep into his heart. Lucas smiled modestly and closed his notebook, learning that recognition could arrive without magic and that honesty in his work mattered most, feeling wisdom grow inside him. The teacher then announced that it was time for art class next, and she dismissed the students 1 row at a time with a friendly wave, feeling excitement bubble up inside Lucas. Lucas gathered his things carefully and followed his partner toward the art room, heart light and mind buzzing with new ideas for drawing, feeling creative and hopeful. In the hall, the curly-haired girl chatted happily about painting trees and clouds, and Lucas found himself laughing at her jokes for the first time that day, feeling true friendship. As they reached the art room door, Lucas paused and took a deep breath, ready to face another part of the school day with hope rather than worry, feeling brave and calm. The door swung open to reveal bright palettes on tables and colorful paper hanging on the walls, and his spirits rose at the cheerful sight, feeling inspired by all the colors. Lucas stepped inside and waved at the teacher who greeted him by name, making him feel more welcome than he had ever felt before in a new school, feeling acceptance and joy. With his secret safe and his confidence growing, Lucas sat down at a table and picked up a paintbrush, eager to explore his creativity alongside new friends, feeling determined and happy. The art teacher, Ms. Rivera, greeted the class with a cheerful smile and explained that today they would create paintings of their favorite animals. Lucas sat at a wooden table covered in bright paints and brushes, his chest fluttering with excitement as he dipped a brush into blue paint. He chose to paint a soaring eagle against a sky of soft clouds, carefully stroking each feather with steady hands. As he painted, Lucas felt a gentle shimmer in his fingertips, so faint he nearly missed it underneath his calm focus. When he added a streak of yellow to the eagle's wing, the paint glowed for a heartbeat before fading back into its bright hue. A student at the next table gasped softly when the glow flickered, and she nudged her friend to look at Lucas's canvas. Lucas paused and looked at his painting in surprise, wondering if his hidden power had risen again without his permission. Ms. Rivera walked by and leaned over Lucas's shoulder to admire his work, praising the detail in his feathers and the boldness of his color choices. Lucas felt a warm wave of pride spread through him, and he nodded shyly in response to the kind words. Across the room, the older bullies watched Lucas with narrowed eyes as they pushed clay figures aside, planning their next trick. One of them raised his hand to ask a question about where to find purple paint, though his tone was clearly meant to distract Lucas. Lucas glanced toward them without losing focus on his painting, and he noticed a faint hum in the air around him. As he mixed red and orange to create the eagle's beak, the new color pulsed softly on his palette, seeming almost alive. The girl next to Lucas pointed to the paint and whispered, "Did you see that?" before giggling in awe. Lucas felt his cheeks warm, but he stayed calm and continued painting the eagle's eye with careful precision. Ms. Rivera returned to the bullies' table and showed them how to blend colors more smoothly, drawing their attention away from Lucas. Relieved, Lucas turned back to his canvas and reached for a darker shade of blue to deepen the sky behind his eagle. As the sky took shape, small wisps of paint drifted off the canvas and floated in the air like tiny clouds. The entire class fell silent as they watched the paint swirl into the shape of a small cloud drifting above Lucas's table. Lucas gasped softly and dropped his brush for a moment, unsure how to make the magic stop without revealing too much. Then he took a deep breath, picked up his brush, and guided the cloud shape gently back onto his canvas with a few light strokes. The paint settled perfectly into a new part of the sky, and Lucas smiled in relief as his secret magic returned to the paper. Ms. Rivera clapped and called the class to gather around Lucas's table, asking him to explain his painting and the moving cloud. Lucas explained slowly that he was simply experimenting with color and light, careful to hide any mention of magic. The classmates nodded and whispered compliments about the moving cloud, calling Lucas's painting the best in the class. The bullies at the back exchanged glances of disbelief before one of them scoffed and walked away in frustration. The bell rang for lunch, and Ms. Rivera reminded everyone to leave their paintings to dry before the afternoon session. Lucas carefully set his canvas on a drying rack before grabbing his backpack and heading toward the cafeteria door. The hallway buzzed with students chatting about art projects and favorite subjects as Lucas followed the curly-haired girl down the hall. When they reached the cafeteria, Lucas smelled the warm aroma of pizza and cinnamon rolls and felt his stomach rumble. They joined a line of students waiting to get their trays, and Lucas eyed the colorful options behind the glass. As he reached the front, Lucas pointed to a slice of cheese pizza and a carton of milk, smiling politely at the lunch lady. He carried his tray to a table where his new friends were waiting, their faces lighting up as he sat down beside them. They offered him a roll and shared a laugh about the moving cloud in art class, making Lucas feel welcome and happy. Suddenly, the older bullies stomped into the cafeteria carrying their own trays, their eyes fixed on Lucas's group. One of them leaned across the table and said in a low voice, "Show us something else, new kid," as though demanding a magic trick. Lucas shifted uncomfortably in his seat and took a bite of pizza to buy time, hoping they would leave him alone. Instead, the bully slammed his tray down so that the milk carton teetered and spilled a few drops onto the floor. The squirt of milk formed a small puddle at Lucas's feet, and the bully laughed as he kicked the carton gently, making Lucas's heart pound. Lucas pressed his lips together and looked at the spilled milk, determined not to let fear drive his next move as lunch continued around them. Lucas stared at the small puddle of milk spreading across the floor in front of his chair, its white liquid glistening under harsh fluorescent lights like tiny liquid pearls scattered on the tile, his heart thumping like a drum as a bead of sweat trickled down his temple, and he wondered whether to let the mess stay or act quickly to hide his secret. Around him, students gasped and moved away on squeaking shoes, worried they might slip, and the cafeteria grew suddenly silent as all eyes turned in his direction, waiting to see what the new student would do next, curiosity and fear mixing in their gazes like swirling shadows. The bully whose kick caused the spill laughed harshly and shook the half-empty carton, letting a few more drops escape with cruel intent, while his friend leaned in and nodded to show he wanted Lucas to react before the teacher arrived. Lucas's stomach tightened with fear, but he sat perfectly still, pressing his palms against his thighs to keep the warmth of his hidden power from spreading too quickly and revealing itself yet again in front of a crowd he barely knew. The curly-haired girl who had sat beside him reached out and tapped his arm softly, giving him a look that said she believed in him and that he could choose the right moment to protect himself from any harm that might come next. For a heartbeat, Lucas thought about lobbing the spilled milk back into the carton with a small push of his power, imagining how the liquid would dance back into its container, but he remembered how quickly things could spiral out of control and chose instead to gather his thoughts in silence. The bully leaned in and whispered in Lucas's ear, "Show us what you can do," or we'll make you clean this up yourself. And his breath felt cold on Lucas's neck like a warning in the wind as students pressed closer to watch. Lucas swallowed hard and inhaled a steady breath, forcing his racing heart to slow and his mind to clear so that he could focus on controlling the warmth that pulsed just beneath his skin, shimmering like a hidden ember ready to flare. A faint glow began to gather in Lucas's right hand as he lowered it slowly to the spilled milk, and the gray shadows under the table shifted as curious classmates leaned forward to see what might happen next, their voices caught in their throats. The bully laughed again and kicked the empty carton across the spilled milk, turning it over to pour the remaining liquid out in a mocking gesture meant to humiliate Lucas and draw more attention from the crowd. Lucas held up his other hand to stop the bully from moving, and as he did so the spilled milk started to roll forward in thin rivulets toward his outstretched palm, following a path as if drawn by an unseen finger and defying the usual laws of gravity. The girl seated across from Lucas gasped and pressed her hand over her mouth, while a few students covered their eyes or leaned back, not sure whether to expect a miracle or a disaster in the crowded lunchroom. Lucas watched with wide eyes as each drop of milk slowed its spread and then traced its course back toward the carton, gathering into small streams that flowed uphill along the smooth floor like tiny silver rivers returning home. The tide of milk rose like a gentle wave and crept into the carton until a container stood upright on the puddle, full again, before Lucas closed his palm and the glow disappeared as quietly as it had arrived. A hush settled over the cafeteria, broken only by the soft drip of a single drop falling from the carton's rim before it landed with a quiet tap, and students exchanged looks that mixed wonder with relief. The bully's jaw hung open in disbelief as his friends stared with wide eyes, both struggling to process what they had just witnessed, and Lucas felt a surge of relief mixed with lingering fear as adrenaline drained slowly from his limbs. Students around the table whispered excitedly, some cheering softly at Lucas's display of kindness rather than power, feeling they had just seen something impossible made gentle and reassuring in their midst. The appointed lunch monitor, a tall 8th grader with strict badge pinned to his shirt, hurried forward and raised his hand for silence as he and the teacher's supervisor approached the table with urgency. Lucas lowered his hand and pushed the carton gently with his finger, so it rolled back to the lunch lady's station, and the monitor's eyebrows shot up in surprise at the empty puddle and full carton, unable to hide his astonishment. The teacher's supervisor knelt and touched the floor where the milk had been spilled, then looked up at Lucas with a mixture of gratitude, astonishment, and a hint of concern in her eyes. She thanked Lucas for preventing a mess that could have caused someone to slip, and the bullies exchanged uneasy glances as they realized their plan had backfired and foolishly targeted the wrong new kid. Around the cafeteria, students broke into applause and cheers, welcoming Lucas as a hero for saving them from a dangerous spill, rather than a freak who needed to be feared, and a few younger kids ran forward to tap the carton in playful gratitude. The curly-haired girl beamed at Lucas from across the table and gave his hand a quick squeeze, letting him know she admired how he had used his power to help instead of to harm anyone. Even the other bullies at neighboring tables leaned forward in curiosity, their earlier scowls replaced by puzzled expressions as they tried to decide if Lucas was friend or stranger now. Lucas's heart pounded like a drum, but he smiled and nodded at his classmates, feeling more accepted than ever before despite the risk of exposure that still rested like a shadow on his shoulders. The supervisor called for order and asked all students to return to their conversation and lunch, reminding them that lunchtime was a time for sharing, not showing off tricks or powers. The lunch monitor gave a small bow to Lucas and then returned to his post by the exit, leaving Lucas with a sense that his secret was safe for now, but always close at hand and needing careful control. As the bell rang to signal the end of lunch, Lucas stood up, smoothing his shirt and gathering his tray with calm movements that hid the adrenaline still coursing through his veins and clouding his vision. His new friends joined him in a small group, guiding him toward the cafeteria door as they chatted about art class and science projects, their laughter like a soft melody in his ears that eased his anxieties. Lucas took a deep breath of the cool hallway air and felt the warmth of his power settle back into a gentle pulse, reminding him that he had to learn to control it every single day if he wanted to stay safe. He glanced over at the bully who had challenged him, noticing a reluctant respect in the older boy's eyes before he turned away without a word or a lingering glare. The curly-haired girl walked beside Lucas and whispered that he was brave and kind, and he smiled at her quietly, grateful for her friendship and trust in him as waves of emotion rose and settled inside. They climbed the stairs toward the next class, and Lucas felt a new strength in his step, as if each footfall marked his growing confidence and hope for the days to come ahead of his lessons. He thought about how kindness had proven stronger than fear, and how he could choose to use his power for good rather than letting it dominate his life and define who he was. At the top of the stairs, he paused for a moment to balance the weight of his books before walking through. Mr. Harris, our science teacher with a warm smile, announced today's lab would explore electricity and magnetism by building circuits with copper wires, batteries, small bulbs, and magnets to watch how energy moves. Lucas and his partner sat at a wooden bench stacked with colorful wires, metal coils, batteries, bulbs, and small bar magnets, discussing how they would connect each piece to complete a working circuit without mistakes. They first attached a red wire to the positive battery terminal and connected a black wire to the bulb's metal base, then held their breath as Lucas twisted the ends to join the circuit and watched the tiny bulb light. As the bulb glowed gently, Lucas felt a surprising tingle in his fingertips and noticed a faint shimmer around the wire joints that no one else seemed to see, but that made his heart beat faster, and a promise of discovery warmed his chest. Lucas's pencil on the bench vibrated when he brushed against a wire, causing the graphite tip to sparkle and draw sharp glances from classmates who whispered about strange magic in a science room. His partner, eyes wide with surprise, asked if the glow was part of the experiment, and Lucas smiled politely while hiding his nervousness, explaining that sometimes circuits seem to glow when current moves smoothly. The tall student at the back tried connecting his wires, but the bulb would not light until Lucas suggested swapping the leads, showing calm knowledge that surprised both partners and the teacher. Mr. Harris walked among the tables and paused at Lucas's bench, eyebrows rising when he saw the bright bulb and the neat wire loops, praising Lucas for his careful work and steady hands. Lucas felt warmth spread through his chest at the praise, and he realized that his focus and care mattered more than any spark of magic flickering at his fingertips, or any shadow of doubt in his mind. At the next station, Mr. Harris explained how wrapping thin copper wire around an iron nail and connecting it to the battery makes an electromagnet, asking students to test how many clips their magnet could lift. Lucas and his partner quickly wound the wire around the nail in neat coils, while their classmates fumbled with loose loops and listened to the teacher's patient guidance. After finishing the coil, Lucas connected the ends to the battery terminals, and the nail lifted 10 paper clips in a smooth motion that left onlookers amazed and scribbling notes. As the student next to Lucas counted the clips, Lucas noticed the magnet's pull was stronger than expected, almost as if an invisible force beyond pure electricity boosted the metal. The coils glowed faintly whenever Lucas held the nail, and he lowered his hand to prevent the brightness from drawing too much attention, reminding himself that timing and control mattered. A classmate whispered that the nail looked like it might move on its own, sending laughter through the lab as students leaned closer to watch the glow fade when Lucas released the magnet. The bullies at the back watched as Lucas's coil held paper clips in neat rows, their mocking scowls softening into puzzled curiosity as they sensed more to the new student than they first thought. Mr. Harris asked Lucas to explain why more wire loops strengthen an electromagnet, and Lucas spoke clearly about how current flows through the coils to create a magnetic field that lifts metal. The teacher then invited everyone to test their magnets and compare how many clips each could lift, guiding them gently while Lucas stood ready to help classmates who needed advice. At one bench, a student's magnet failed to lift a single clip, so Lucas offered a calm suggestion to add more loops, and when a student did so, the nail lifted 3 clips, earning Lucas a nod. The lab grew noisier as students chatted about their results, but Lucas sensed his own shimmer of magic fade to a gentle warmth he could manage without worry. Mr. Harris concluded the lesson by reminding everyone that controlled electrical energy can power lights, motors, and tools, and that safety and neat work help science stay fun. He announced that tomorrow they would build a simple motor with magnets and coils, and Lucas felt a spark of excitement and quiet anticipation at the thought of exploring more of these forces together. When class ended, Lucas and his partner gathered the wires, batteries, and magnets and returned them to the plastic trays, making sure everything was in its place for the next group. As Lucas handed the nail back, his fingertips tingled at the memory of the strong magnetic pull, and he wondered if he could learn to make that glow appear only when necessary. The taller bully from lunch walked past and glared at the neat coils of wire, but he did not challenge Lucas or try the experiment, instead lowering his gaze and walking away. Lucas felt quiet satisfaction that simple science and his focus had impressed someone who had mocked him earlier, confirming that skill could earn respect without magic. He smiled at his partner and they walked toward the lockers, talking about the experiments and wondering what questions they might ask about the motor tomorrow. In the hall, Lucas heard voices calling history class ahead and the hum of students changing rooms, reminding him that more lessons and adventures awaited in the rest of the day. His partner said she could not wait to see the motor spin like a small machine, and Lucas nodded, imagining the coil rotating between magnets under gentle control. Lucas realized that science held a quiet magic of its own, based on careful steps, trial and error, and the wonder of discovering how the world works through simple rules. He thought how his hidden gifts might help him understand these rules in a new way, blending magic with facts to create ideas no one else would think of. As they reached the lockers, Lucas paused to calm his breathing and quiet the warmth in his hands, reminding himself to save his power for moments of real need. He opened his locker and arranged his books, placing the science notebook on top so he could review the results before the motor project began, determined to prepare well. The curly-haired girl stepped beside him and asked if he would study science after school, suggesting they compare notes and draw diagrams, and Lucas felt grateful for her support. He agreed and packed his sketchbook into his backpack, picturing drawing detailed pictures of circuits and coils to make his own science guide for fun. The tall hallway windows let in golden light as Lucas closed his locker door, making the day feel brighter and reminding him that each moment brought new chances to learn. As the final bell rang, Lucas slung his backpack over his shoulder and turned toward the exit, ready to head home after a day full of experiments and discoveries and reflect on the wonders of science he had discovered. He thought how science and his own secret powers both followed rules, and how understanding those rules would help him use his magic responsibly and kindly. Lucas walked down a corridor toward the doors, passing friends who waved and teachers who smiled, feeling that Riverwood was becoming part of his story now. With one last look at the science lab through the window, Lucas stepped into the fresh afternoon air, eager to return tomorrow to another day of discovery and wonder. When the history bell rang across the sunlit corridors, students quickly grabbed their thick, well-worn textbooks and moved down the long hallway to enter the old history classroom filled with tall, polished wooden desks, a faded world map hanging crookedly on the back wall, and a fine layer of chalk dust stirring gently in the golden beams of afternoon light. Lucas slid into a desk near the front row, letting his backpack settle on the cool, tiled floor at his feet as he studied the map's bright colors and wondered what new facts about ancient empires would soon come to life before him. The teacher, Mr. Alvarez, tapped his chalk on the blackboard, greeting the class with a warm smile before writing today's title in neat, looping letters, Early Mesopotamian Civilizations and Their Innovations. He then drew two long, straight lines beneath the heading to serve as a timeline guide and distributed fresh pieces of chalk to each group, explaining that they would work together to add dates, names, and small illustrations of key inventions. In the back row, the bullies exchanged smug grins and tossed chalk sticks at each other until Mr. Alvarez's sharp glance cut through their laughter, sending a hush over the room that made even the dust in the air seem to still. Lucas picked up his piece of chalk with careful fingers and felt a gentle tingle spread from his palm up through his wrist, as though his hidden power stirred beneath his skin, ready to guide his hand with precise control. He glanced down at the list of dates in his notebook: 3500 BCE, 3000 BCE, 2500 BCE, and lifted his hand to write the first date on the timeline in clean, confident strokes. As the chalk touched the board, it glowed with a soft silver sheen for a heartbeat before fading back to its usual white, catching Mr. Alvarez's eye and pausing him mid-step as he studied the line with narrowed curiosity. Without drawing undue attention, Lucas continued writing each date in the same precise script, and each chalk stroke shimmered briefly like dew on grass before returning to its quiet, chalky normal. A classmate leaned over and whispered something to her friend about the strange, glowing chalk line, and Lucas felt heat rise to his cheeks but kept his gaze focused on the neat timeline unfolding before him. Mr. Alvarez stopped at the board, tapped his chalk thoughtfully, and asked in a soft voice whether the board might need extra cleaning, to which Lucas calmly replied that sometimes old chalk catches the light in odd ways on a well-worn surface. The teacher nodded slowly and walked to another part of the room, inviting a student to try drawing a small ziggurat symbol, but that student's chalk remained dull and gray without Lucas's guiding touch. Taking a gentle breath, Lucas stepped forward and sketched a tiny clay tablet icon next to 2500 BC, and the chalk shimmered again before settling into a bright, unbroken white that made the drawing stand out. A soft gasp rippled through the room as students leaned forward with wide eyes, and even the bullies in the back row exchanged uneasy looks instead of their usual sneers. Mr. Alvarez raised an eyebrow, adjusted his glasses, and asked the class to name aloud each date Lucas had drawn so far, prompting hands to shoot up and voices to call out events from irrigation canals to early laws. Lucas repeated each date clearly and confidently, matching Mr. Alvarez's pointer movements as he spoke, and the board filled with precise loops and lines guided by his steady hand. After the dates were listed, the teacher invited everyone to add important facts beside each one, reminding them that teamwork would make their collective timeline display stronger and more complete. Groups formed quickly around a room, and Lucas began writing notes about the invention of the wheel in neat block letters, feeling a soft pulse of warmth in his palm as the chalk tip glowed faintly before returning to its regular hue. His group members watched him work and copied his style, adding facts about cuneiform writing and grain storage while whispering excitedly about how clear and organized their timeline looked. The bullies rose from their seats and approached Lucas's group, claiming they wanted to add their own facts, their voices polite but their eyes still flickering with challenge. Lucas nodded and handed one of them his notebook, explaining which dates matched which facts as he shared information about royal decrees and temple ceremonies. One bully wrote a fact about irrigation canals next to Lucas's date, and his chalk-covered fingertip glowed gently as he traced the letters, causing him to stare in astonishment at the subtle light. Lucas met his gaze with a calm, steady look, then stepped back so his group could finish their work without further interruptions or fear of mocking. Together they sketched small ziggurats, winding canals, and clay tablets along the lines of the timeline, careful to leave space for each invention and discovery in chronological order. Mr. Alvarez walked along the rows, pausing by Lucas's timeline to study the neat dates and sketches, then nodded in approval at the clear, accurate display they had created. He turned to the class and praised their teamwork, saying that history truly comes alive when students collaborate to map out how ideas and inventions have shaped the world. Mr. Alvarez then asked Lucas to share one fact from the timeline, and Lucas described in simple, clear words how irrigation canals had allowed farmers to bring river water to their fields and grow more food for large cities. The entire class listened quietly, some taking notes while others simply stared at Lucas's calm face and the perfect timeline he helped create, filled with dates, drawings, and carefully written facts. Next, the teacher called on the former bullies and asked them to explain a fact about early law codes, and they spoke clearly about Hammurabi's code as though their earlier scowls had never existed. Lucas smiled and nodded in encouragement at their answers, showing that respect and collaboration could turn rivals into teammates when given a chance to shine. Mr. Alvarez concluded the activity by praising the whole class, remarking that he had never seen such a detailed and accurate timeline constructed in a single lesson. A warm murmur of pride and quiet chatter filled the room as students gathered their supplies, congratulating one another on a job well done and discussing the upcoming quiz. The final bell rang, echoing through the desks and sending a ripple of excitement through the students as they packed up their notebooks and chalk pieces. Lucas felt the familiar warmth in his hands settle back into a gentle pulse as his hidden power retreated, reminding him of the importance of control and self-discipline. The bullies offered a brief nod of respect before leaving the room, their earlier scowls replaced by looks of thoughtful curiosity that hinted at a new understanding. Outside the classroom, classmates patted Lucas's shoulder and invited him to join their study group, making him feel more accepted and valued than ever before. Lucas smiled and agreed to meet them after school in the library, choosing friendship and teamwork over retreat after the surprising lesson. He shouldered his backpack, placing his history notebook on top so he could review the timeline notes before tomorrow's quiz, and walked down the hallway with steady steps.